Thank you for joining me today. It's Brian Gubernick, and welcome to the No Days Off podcast, where we believe that every single day brings a new opportunity to get better. Let's get into it. Today, I want to talk about decision-making, problem-solving, and specifically starting with finding the root of the problem. Here's the issue. Here's why I'm bringing this up today. What I've found over the course of life and business is that oftentimes we do not come up with the right solution, not because the solution isn't ideal, but because we failed to define the true problem. In other words, we come up with the wrong problem, we define the wrong problem, and as a result, come up with a solution that's not going to get the job done because, again, we defined the problem incorrectly. So I want to talk today around how we can get better at defining the problem. Great decision makers, oftentimes what stops them from taking charge, what stops them from moving intentionally towards their objectives, is that they accept the problem statement that's handed to them and they immediately jump into solving it. That's just how we operate. If you're a great decision maker, you want to take charge, you want to move quickly, you want to move with intentionality, and so you tend to accept the problem statement and you just jump immediately into solving it. We reward solving problems at a much greater rate than we award defining the problem. So again, high achievers, like those listening to the No Days Off podcast, we oftentimes just jump into solving. Well, how we state the problem is actually what puts us on a path toward success. And most of the time, the first problem that's put on the table is not actually the problem we really need to solve. Our impatience is what prompts us to solve that problem. We go into solution mode. So if you're a decision maker, you need to think through the problem yourself. Other people, including experts, can give you a great starting place, but you, as the decision maker, you need to figure out the root problem for yourself. Now, there's two ways we can use to increase the odds that we're solving the right problem. The first way is to just simply never accept someone else's definition of the problem. Accept what they're giving you as a starting point, but do your own work and don't jump into solutions. Now, the second way to increase the odds you're solving the right problem is when it's more team-based, put up a firewall between the problem definition and the problem solution. You need to separate the problem definition and the solution into two distinct meetings, even a day or two apart. Now, what are we trying to accomplish here? Separating the problem definition from the solution. What we're trying to do is slow people down. Allow you to ask people questions, not get caught up in the heat of the moment, and allow you to think on the problem. Only after you understand the problem and have thought about it as a team can you actually start evaluating options. So don't put these two things in the same meeting. In your personal decisions, you got to give yourself time to get clear on what the problem is before you actually solve it. So again, time, which is something we've talked about here at No Days Off, just allowing time in the decision-making process. Time is such an important variable. You've got to create more space. And in doing so, you could ask more questions, you could think more thoroughly. So you want to create space between defining the problem and actually trying to come up with solutions. Okay? So the first step when a problem is presented is to ask this question. Is this really the problem, or is it just a symptom of the problem? So the first step when a problem is presented, ask, is this really the problem, or is this just a symptom of the problem? Am I dealing with the root problem, or am I dealing with secondary problems that the root problem is actually creating? What is the real problem at hand? A good example, if you're in the sales business and you say, we've got a big problem. We've got a really big problem. We are not converting business because we are not putting in the activities required to convert that business. Well, that may be the problem. But there's so many other things that could be potentially impacting sales conversion. Maybe it's what we're saying. Maybe it's lack of value being provided. Maybe it's the way it's being articulated. We're poorly communicating. Right? So much more can go into it than just lack of activity. Again, lack of activity very well may be the problem once you define it. But we've got to kind of flesh out, this problem and make certain that we're defining it clearly, because again, the solution for the wrong problem ends up being the wrong solution. So you want to ask these questions. Is this a symptom or is it a problem? Another way to test if you're solving a cause or a symptom is to see if solving this particular problem passes the test of time. In other words, whatever you're solving for, will it just pop back up again in 3 weeks or in a month or in 2 months or in a year? If it doesn't pass the test of time, in other words, if it is in fact going to pop back up, odds are you solved for a symptom and you didn't solve for a problem. When you look at a problem, ask whether fixing it will stand the test of time. And if it won't, again, you're not solving the root problem. Sometimes that's okay, but it's worth digging into the problem statement to figure out if you can have an even greater impact. Lastly, if there's multiple people involved in a decision, it's really worth trying to get an agreed upon understanding of the problem. So usually when we talk around consensus, we talk about it in the sense of a path forward and not in defining the problem itself. But we've got to get consensus in the problem. So it's a lot better to have consensus around the problem before talking about the solution, because then you're all starting from the same point of understanding and what you're trying to solve, and you're not arguing about solutions to solve different problems. So, where I'm going with this today, why I'm bringing this up, I think this problem is very prevalent, more so than we even realize, where we start solving things so quickly that we fail to take our time to define the problem. And I want to encourage everybody to slow down, ask more questions to better define the problem. And in doing so, you're going to lead yourself down a path that creates a greater solution. One thing I like to do is when I'm with a group and we all agree there's some sort of problem. What I like to do is go to each member of that group and say, hey, tell me, in your own words, what's the problem we're actually solving? Here's what I've experienced in asking that question. When I go around the room and I say, what's the problem we're solving, especially if I'm doing it with individuals independent of one another, in other words, they're not all in the same room so they can't hear what one another is sharing. If I have a call or a Zoom or whatever it may be and I say, hey, what's the problem we're solving? Maybe this will be a surprise to many of you, but the responses are almost always different. So we've got to get consensus around the problem. Otherwise, it's a waste of time. So once I've gathered all these responses, I can kind of go through the same exercises I was just describing. For each one, I'm going to ask, what would have to be true for this problem not to exist? And will solving this problem stand the test of time? And I could break down each one of these responses and kind of come back to the group and say, okay, you've all given feedback. I've tested each of these thoughts. Here's what I believe the problem to be. I can help everyone get clarity on the problem. And now we can move forward on solutions. So on that note, the focusing question, I want you to take to pause a bit today when you start problem solving. I want you to start by really challenging your assumptions around the problem, what you perceive the problem to be. So the focusing question, what comes up today? How can you pause? How can you redefine the problem? How can you challenge your assumptions and lead towards a greater solution? That's all I have for you today, the No Days Off podcast. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, every single day brings a new opportunity to get better. So let's get after it.